Ghostbusters turned proton packs, slime, and a 100-foot marshmallow man into one of the most beloved comedies in film history. Premiering in 1984, it dropped four out-of-work parapsychologists onto the streets of New York and asked Bill Murray's wisecracking Peter Venkman, Dan Aykroyd's wide-eyed Ray Stantz, Harold Ramis' deadpan Egon Spengler, and Ernie Hudson's Winston Zeddemore to save the city from an ancient Sumerian god, with Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis caught in the middle of the chaos. Across a record-breaking theatrical run, 3 sequels, a reboot, 2 animated series, and 4 decades of pop culture, Ghostbusters became one of the most quoted and rewatched comedies in Hollywood history. Yet behind the ghost traps and Stay Puft mayhem was a saga of impossible budgets, near miscasting, unscripted improvisation, and a production rushed so fast that the visual effects company building most of the film didn't even exist when the project began. The original script was a $200 million space opera. Long before Ghostbusters became a New York comedy, it was something far stranger. Dan Aykroyd's first draft was titled Ghost Smashers and didn't take place anywhere near Manhattan. Set in the year 2012, it followed rival teams of ghost hunters chasing spirits across other planets, other times, and other dimensions. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, who would become the film's beloved final villain, was originally just one of about 50 huge monsters scattered through the script. There was also an illegal ghost storage site hidden at a New Jersey gas station that explodes, opens a 25-acre sinkhole, and wakes up a sleeping fault line. When director Ivan Reitman read it, he loved the concept but also did the math. Bringing Aykroyd's vision to screen would have cost around $200 million, nearly 20 times the average studio budget at the time. No studio was going to hand that kind of money to a comedy. Reitman pitched a new direction, a team of ghost researchers kicked out of their university who start their own small business and take on hauntings one customer at a time. The new version was funnier, cheaper, and set in a world audiences would recognize. Harold Ramis came aboard to reshape the characters and tighten the script while keeping the supernatural ambition Aykroyd had originally dreamed up. A single yes from a studio executive made the whole thing possible. In May 1983, Reitman walked into the office of Columbia president Frank Price and pitched the movie. Price liked what he heard and asked how much it would cost. Reitman pulled a number out of thin air. His last hit with Bill Murray's Stripes had cost about $10 million, so he said maybe 3 times that. $30 million for a comedy. Most studio bosses would have shown him the door. Price agreed on the spot, with one condition. The film had to be ready for theaters by June 8, 1984. That gave the team just 13 months to write the final script, build a special effects company from scratch, and shoot the entire movie. The gamble paid off enormously. Ghostbusters became the highest-grossing comedy ever made at the time, and one of the defining films of the decade. Dan Aykroyd came from a real family of ghost hunters. There is a reason Ghostbusters sounds so confident whenever it dives into paranormal territory. Aykroyd wasn't making most of it up. His family had been hunting, studying, and trying to contact ghosts for 4 generations before he was born. His great-grandfather Samuel was a dentist by day and a paranormal researcher by night, holding seances at the family farmhouse in Ontario. His grandfather tried to build a device that could communicate with the dead. His father eventually wrote a full book on the family's paranormal history. Growing up, Aykroyd has said the family didn't read National Geographic. They read the journals of the American Society for Psychical Research. By the time he sat down to write Ghostbusters, he didn't need to invent the technical language, because he already knew it. Terms like full-body apparition and ectoplasm came straight from his great-grandfather's journals. The trick was making the invented parts feel equally real. Zol and Vins weren't pulled from any actual mythology. Aykroyd made them up, but gave them such confidently ancient-sounding names that audiences and critics assumed they had been lifted from some old religious text. The original library ghost was even more terrifying than what audiences saw. Ghostbusters opens with a quick, almost gentle scare in the New York Public Library. A floating card catalog, a shushing librarian who turns demonic for one terrifying second. But the version audiences saw in 1984 wasn't the original plan. The library ghost was designed by Bernie Wrightson, the legendary horror artist behind decades of Swamp Thing comics and the definitive illustrated edition of Frankenstein. His sketches were genuinely frightening, and his rough drawings of the demonic version became the blueprint the effects team built from. His concept art even included a cartoon speech bubble of the ghost shouting, "Quiet," a gag that nearly made the final film before being replaced with a simple roar. The original plan called for the ghost to transform twice, shifting after the first scary face into an even more demonic form with muscles pushing out and sharp monster-like teeth. The puppet for the second stage was almost finished when visual effects supervisor Richard Edlund pulled the plug. Not because of fear of scaring audiences, but because the budget was already stretched thin, and a second transformation was a luxury they couldn't afford. When the simpler version was shown to test audiences, the reaction was exactly what the filmmakers had hoped for, screaming and laughing at the same time. Winston Zeddemore lost most of his character overnight. When Ernie Hudson auditioned for Ghostbusters, the Winston on the page was a very different person. In the earlier draft, Winston had a full backstory as a 5-year U.S. Air Force Air Police captain with experience in demolitions. He appeared on page 8 of the script, and his military skills were going to matter to the story. The role had originally been written for Eddie Murphy, who was a rising comedy star at the time, but Murphy was already committed to Beverly Hills Cop. Then came the night before filming. Hudson received a new script, and the Winston he had signed on to play was mostly gone. The character now didn't appear until page 68. The military background had been stripped out entirely, and the role reduced to a regular guy who shows up late because he needs the work. The studio had decided to lean harder on its 3 Saturday Night Live stars, who were already massive box office draws. Winston got squeezed in the process, and Hudson also took a significant pay cut, accepting only half his original asking price. He has talked openly over the years about how hard that overnight change was, calling Ghostbusters one of the most psychologically difficult experiences of his career. Yet despite the smaller role and the lost backstory, he turned Winston into one of the most loved characters in the entire franchise. Bill Murray improvised his way into the English language. Peter Venkman was written as snarky and charming with most of his dialogue laid out on the page. Murray looked at that plan and quietly threw most of it out. According to Aykroyd, roughly 80% of Murray's lines in the final film were improvised, with everything else serving as structure and setup. One of his best moments actually entered the dictionary. When the team confronts Gozer near the end of the film, the script told Venkman to deliver a tough line about turning Gozer into toast. But the original line was written when Gozer was meant to be played by a man. By the time the scene was shot, Gozer was being played by model Slavica Jovan. Murray adjusted on the spot. The Oxford English Dictionary now credits that moment as the earliest recorded use of toast to mean someone is doomed. In the library scene, the script told Murray to shout at his teammates to grab the ghost. Instead, he ad-libbed calling himself a scientist, as if that explained why he was already backing away. When the team first encountered Slimer in the hotel hallway, Murray's joke about the green ghost being an ugly little spud was a pure reaction in the moment. Almost every quotable Venkman line came from a comic who refused to read what was written for him. 2 auditions reshaped the entire film. Rick Moranis and Sigourney Weaver both arrived with ideas that went far beyond what was on the page. Louis Tully, as originally written, was a plain nerdy neighbor with no clear profession. The role had actually been offered to John Candy, who insisted on playing Louis with a German accent and a pair of Rottweilers. Reitman refused, and Candy walked away. Moranis got the script 2 hours later, called Reitman almost immediately, and told him he knew exactly what to do with the part. Moranis was the one who decided Louis should be an accountant. He also improvised nearly all of his party scene dialogue, including the long, painful speech where Louis walks his guests through his lease, his food costs, and his plan to write off the entire party as a business expense. None of it was scripted. Weaver's contribution came from an even stranger place. She misread the script. The terror dog transformation that defines the film's final act wasn't in the original story at all. Weaver came to the audition assuming Dana would literally turn into a dog, so she climbed onto Reitman's coffee table, dropped to all fours, started howling, and began gnawing on a throw pillow. Reitman has said he turned the camera off and told her to never do that again because an editor might want to use it. He hired her almost immediately, then called Harold Ramis and rewrote the ending. The proton packs were miserable to wear. They look heroic on screen. The satisfying hum when they power up, the sleek metal frame on a Ghostbusters back. Wearing one was a completely different experience. The original 1984 proton packs weighed around 50 pounds when fully loaded with working lights, electronics, and batteries. Bill Murray has compared them to small refrigerators. The cast wore them for up to 14 hours a day with no lightweight versions available. Murray called wearing the original packs miserable, and when he had to put one back on for Ghostbusters Afterlife in 2021, he upgraded his review to torture. Dan Aykroyd, sitting next to him during one televised interview, didn't disagree. He just nodded with a tight smile. After every take, the cast would stare at each other and mutter that this had to be the final one. Murray has said they meant the final take of the entire movie. It never was. The crew filmed across New York without permits. A large portion of the film's exterior footage, including the famous montage where the Ghostbusters become local celebrities, was shot without any permits at all. Associate producer Joe Medjuk later admitted the team got up early, grabbed a small crew, and raced through Manhattan in a single day, hitting Chinatown, Rockefeller Center, 42nd Street, Saks Fifth Avenue, and the United Nations before anyone could stop them. Aykroyd was behind the wheel of the Ecto, one the entire time, driving the iconic ambulance through real New York traffic. The closest the crew came to getting shut down was outside Radio City Music Hall, where a man in a suit approached Reitman and asked if they had permission to be there. The conversation moved off camera, and somehow the crew kept rolling. New Yorkers wandered into shots, shouted at actors, and blocked traffic. A street preacher on Fifth Avenue spent an entire morning yelling that all of Hollywood was going to hell. The production eventually had to pay him to take a break, so they could finish the scene. The production burned through 17 Stay Puft suits. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man looked soft and friendly on screen. Bringing him to life was anything but. The suit was designed and built by special effects artist Bill Bryan, who also performed in it for most close-up scenes, with stunt performers handling the more dangerous work of stomping, falling, and burning. The production built 3 hero suits for main performance scenes plus 15 burn suits made specifically to be set on fire, each costing between $25,000 and $35,000. The outer foam layer was toxic when ignited, meaning whoever was inside needed a supplied air system to breathe. The burning sequences kept going wrong because whenever the stuntman caught fire, he would instinctively drop to the ground, the universal signal for "put me out right now," destroying the suit each time. The goo raining down on Walter Peck at the film's climax wasn't marshmallow either. It was 75 pounds of shaving cream, and the drop knocked a stuntman flat on his back before the mixture was lightened enough for actor William Atherton to step under the rig. Columbia got the Ghostbusters name for almost nothing, and it caused years of legal chaos. *** Columbia Pictures didn't own the title when production began. The name belonged to Filmation, the animation studio behind a 1975 Saturday morning live-action comedy called The Ghostbusters. That show only lasted 15 episodes, but the title remained legally protected. After cycling through placeholder names like Ghost Smashers, Ghost Stoppers, and Ghost Blasters, Columbia eventually licensed the title from Filmation for $500,000 plus 1% of any profits. Filmation head Lou Schemer later called it his dumbest mistake. The film grossed around $165 million, but thanks to Hollywood accounting, it officially never turned a profit on paper, meaning Filmation never saw a penny of the promised percentage. When Ghostbusters became a global hit, Filmation offered to produce the animated spin-off, but Columbia walked away and gave the contract to DIC instead. Furious, Filmation dusted off its own 1975 property and rushed an animated series into production, premiering it 5 days ahead of Columbia's. To make sure audiences knew which cartoon was tied to the movie, Columbia and DIC titled theirs The Real Ghostbusters. The Ghostbusters theme song triggered 2 separate lawsuits. Ray Parker Jr. wasn't even the first choice. Producers approached Lindsey Buckingham, who declined. They approached Huey Lewis, who was already busy writing songs for the Back to the Future soundtrack, and also turned it down. Columbia eventually called Parker and gave him only a few days. He struggled until 4:30 in the morning, 3 hours before his deadline, when he spotted a late-night TV commercial with a phone number flashing on screen. Instead of singing the word Ghostbusters himself, he would ask, "Who you gonna call?" and let a crowd shout the answer back. The song debuted at number 68 on the Billboard Hot 100 in June 1984, climbed to number 1 by August by Knocking Prince's When Doves Cry from the top spot, stayed there for 3 weeks, and earned an Oscar nomination. Then Huey Lewis heard something familiar. The melody and chorus sounded remarkably like his 1983 hit I Want a New Drug, and it turned out producers had been editing the movie using that song as a temporary score, specifically telling Parker they wanted something that sounded like Lewis. Lewis sued Columbia and Parker in 1985, and the case settled for a reported $5 million under a strict confidentiality agreement. In 2001, Lewis discussed the settlement openly on VH1's Behind the Music, breaking the confidentiality clause. Parker sued him for the breach and won a second payout, reportedly in the tens of thousands. The film premiered with major effects still missing, and the unfinished cut still exists. Ghostbusters had just 13 months from greenlight to theatrical release to write the script, shoot the film, and create more than 200 special effects shots, including 50 matte paintings transforming the New York skyline. The visual effects company responsible for most of the film's ghosts, Boss Film Studios, didn't even exist at the start of production. Richard Edlund had just left Industrial Light and Magic, and Columbia advanced him $5 million to build a new company from scratch in Marina del Rey. At one point, his team of 163 people was simultaneously working on Ghostbusters and 2010, the year we make contact. Early test screenings contained no music, no theme song, no Elmer Bernstein score, and entire scenes playing in complete silence with effects shots replaced by rough placeholders. Editor Sheldon Kahn recorded one of those early cuts on Betamax and kept it for decades. When Jason Reitman was making Ghostbusters Afterlife, that tape resurfaced, was transferred to digital, and screened at Alamo Drafthouse so fans could see exactly what 1984 test audiences actually watched. Even in that unfinished state, the reaction had been strong enough to convince the studio they had something special. 4 decades later, the franchise has crossed $1 billion. Ghostbusters 2 arrived in 1989 with the original team back to battle mood slime and a haunted painting of Vigo the Carpathian, grossing $215 million worldwide against the original's $295 million. Siskel and Ebert both gave it 2 thumbs down. A 27-year pause followed before Sony attempted a full reboot in 2016 with an all-female team played by Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones. It earned $229 million against a $144 million budget, but drew a fierce online backlash, and Sony abandoned that timeline entirely. Ghostbusters Afterlife in 2021, directed by Jason Reitman, took a legacy sequel approach, with Egon Spengler's grandchildren discovering his old equipment in rural Oklahoma, earning a 94% audience approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes despite a pandemic-reduced box office. Frozen Empire in 2024 brought the veterans back to New York alongside the Afterlife cast plus Kumail Nanjiani and Patton Oswalt, pushing the franchise's total earnings past the $1 billion mark while earning the worst critical score in franchise history and an 83% audience approval in the same breath. For decades after 4 unemployed parapsychologists opened a ghost removal business out of a condemned firehouse, Ghostbusters is still actively producing major theatrical releases. Very few films from 1984 can say the same.